Okay, yes. So now I got the message. Very well. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to one more session of Address Real-Time Dispute Resolution Mechanism. Today we have a different set of program. We are now going to have some interaction and participation in question and answer, and then later on we are going to upload this into the YouTube channel for the recorded session. Our guest, as I think all of you know, is Professor Venkata Raghavan. We call him fondly as Professor Venkat from Manipal Law School. He's now the man of the hour for the entire country because he started a LLM program in construction law. I'm not the correct person to talk more on the syllabus on that, but in the lines of that, I think a small trailer is what we are going to see today. And for that, the topic is contentious issues in variations. And nobody is above that. All the contractors are suffering. And of course, there are some situations where the employer may also suffer. But nonetheless, let's see how these things go. So let's start with the very first understanding. What is variation? So, Professor Venkat, can you please help us and walk us through this process and tell us what variation actually means?
Sure. Thanks, Pradeep. Thanks for the introduction. Thanks for Adraas for having this series, which is really good in the industry. You should have more and more podcasts and these kind of programs, which will be very helpful for the practicing professionals. Now, in fact, if you see the conferences everywhere, the delay and the disruption and the EOT and claims, that takes the lion's share of the discussions everywhere. Very rarely we get to discuss the variations. Even when it comes to the cost, most of the time we will be talking on the EOT cost or the loss of profit or the head office expenses. So these are all the topics normally. So that's why I thought it may be a good idea to talk about the variation, because on the face of it, it may look very simple, but there are some critical issues that we will see through that through our discussion. To make it short, since we have the time is short, see the variation from a lawyer's perspective. When you say there is a variation in the contract, immediately they think that there is a change in the terms and conditions. That's what normally it's considered as a variation. So they'll ask, okay, what is changed? What are the terms changed? Does it add any risk? But from a quantity surveys or from a contract administrator's perspective, variation is part and parcel of the game. So most of the contracts allow variations to be incorporated. In fact, FEDIC Red Book contract, it says that this contract is meant for having the flexibility for the employer to incorporate variations. So when we say variations, at least for our today's discussion, we are not talking about the variations in the contract terms and conditions, which is an altered contract which needs to be signed upon agreement between the parties. But today we are talking about the change of scope, which is instructed or not instructed during the scope of the work. So we
Let
are
me
discussing that.
let me rephrase just for the purpose of legal professionals also. So a contract variation can be that instead of asking you to build a house, I could ask you to build a bridge. Of course, that's very extreme. So that can we say is a contractual variation? Or instead of asking you to complete the work in 1 year, I'll ask you to complete in 6 months. So that could be a contractual variation. That's not a scope change, what we are talking today, but it's more of a contractual variation. A scope change could be instead of using 1,000 cubic meters, you may be required to use 2,000 cubic meters. Am I correct, Professor Venkat?
Yeah, again, there is another confusion. People say if it's a unit rate contract, if there is a change in the quantities, it is not really a variation. That's one school of thinking. The other school says even in a unit rate contract, if there is a substantial increase or decrease, then it amounts to variation, because the rates could change, the overhead pattern could change, the absorption of overheads could change. So I think in the unit rate contract also a substantial change in the quantities most likely to qualify for a variation. But we will keep discussing the various types and the contentious issues as we go in the discussion.
Just to share a little bit more input on that unit rate, what happens is most of the government contracts here, they incorporate a condition that for any item of work that is not related to earthwork, because we don't know what lies below, that is below the plinth level, all the things that are above, the variation can be plus or minus 5%.
Mm.
For that plus or minus 5%, the rates have to be the same. But for the items that are below the plinth level, that includes the excavation or the foundations, variation can be up to 15 to 20%. And for that, there cannot be any rate change. And that pretty much falls in line with what you've been sharing with us. So that
Yeah.
leads us to the next question, that why do these type of changes happen? Can we not plan or design things so that there are no scope for variations?
Yeah, that's actually a good question. In fact, in my 38 years of experience, I haven't never finished a project without a variation. It could be addition or it could be deletion, because there could be a lot of changes in the construction contracts. We can say that ground conditions, technology change. We can keep on adding the design engineers a different idea or the value engineering. But the fundamental reason for the change in the construction contracts, in my experience, is client often changes his mind. They are very wild in imagination. So, in fact, there was a project in Bahrain. We started with a residential tower. 6 months down the line, it went to a hotel. Then he wanted a serviced apartments after 1 year. When we have 6 months to complete the project, he asked, "Can we convert that into a office tower?" So we said, "Enough of changes. We cannot do anything more than that." So the client thinks that he has a right to change and he wants to improve his asset in terms of the value or the return on investment. So that's the one of the major areas or the reasons for the construction contracts keep changing throughout its life.
Hmm. So that's nice. So it's like going to a hotel thinking that we want to eat a biryani, but then we like the ice cream, and then we like the Coca-Cola, and then we like something more to go with that. And by the
True,
time we
true.
are having, instead of just one item, we are having the entire buffet.
Something like
Okay,
that. Something
something
like
like
that.
that. Very well. If there is a variation, can a contractor say that he will undertake only after the approval? That is, there is clarity on how much money he will receive on that variation. Can a contractor state that?
Unfortunately, no. This is one of the another areas of contention. Most of the time, the contractors argue. See, I have contracted to do the scope of work as per the drawings, as per the original scope of work. You are asking me to do additional work. So on the face of it, it looks like it's a genuine request or a genuine comment from the contractor, because he got the drawings, he priced the works. Then after that, it was negotiated perhaps, and he got the project awarded at that price. What the parties agree. Now, when there is a variation comes, why not we follow the same procedure what we follow for the original contract was initiated? But unfortunately, if you see most of the standard forms of contracts say the owner has a unilateral right to instruct variations. What does it mean? If there is an instruction from the engineer to vary the works, it is the contractor's duty to get on with the variation without waiting for the implications of that. That could be the time implications or the additional money, additional cost. Without finalizing that, he is under obligation to complete or undertake the work. So that's how the contracts look. It was actually a lot of times it debated, even in the FedEx conferences. So why do the contractor to be under the obligation without getting these things sorted out at the beginning, which could be reducing the disputes at later point of time? The main reason is time is of essence. The projects are all already tight. It could take some weeks, if not months, for commercially all the things to be sorted out. When there is a mechanism available in the contract for the compensation, it is not going to add any harm to the contractor, at least from the views of the employer. So the contractor have to proceed with the variation without waiting for the commercial aspects agreed. That's the stand today, most of the construction contracts.
Now, again, I'm thinking out loud and saying if there is certain amount of work being asked me to do, which is a variation, and I undertake the work, when will I receive the payment for that variation work? Because you just said that some of these variations to be finalized could take months to go through
Yeah.
all the planning and preparing the estimates and getting the approval. So if that is the case, when will I receive the payment? Is there an opportunity for me to receive a part payment based on
Yes.
some rule of thumb, or do I need to wait for the payment also until the approvals?
Generally, in mega contracts where the cash flow is of a great concern, we have seen that a partial payment to the extent of materials purchased is reimbursed. And another thing, even in the construction contracts, most of the time, the materials received are automatically included in your monthly bills. So that way, partially the contractor, even if he is bringing more than what is needed for the project, at the time of billing, monthly billing, running bills, the interim payment application, he has an opportunity to get some payment for the materials purchased, but that may not cover all the overheads or the labor. So generally, there has to be some kind of a time schedule. We have to see that when we can have the agreement possible, not waiting until like an EOT that you have to finish the project, then we will look at your variation. I don't think the variations which are all genuine and both the parties agree that it's a variation, uh, although it is not happening early enough, it happens somewhere downwards, maybe 3 to 6 months down the line, that we have some kind of an agreement about that. Again, two things which will be the bottleneck there. What is the overhead percentage I need to pay to the contractor? The other one is what is the profit the contractor can claim? These two things are never clear from the day one. The bills doesn't say that what is the profit unless the contracts are very clear that what is the profit to be paid for a varied works. So generally the contractors argue that they wanted to have their profit and the overheads as per their wishing, but the clients always argue, and this is one of the reasons where most of the variations are not settled during the currency of the contracts and they spill over to the final account and the later part of the time. This is my experience.
And well, let me share a completely off the track example. Uh, when I was in the US and working there, the professional services that we did were billed on hourly basis. So the
Okay.
government would, prior to, and some of these, not for all the government agencies, but some of these top level government agencies, they would require us to get our accounts audited before we
Mhm.
are finalized the contract. During that audit process, they go through this process and say that these are your company overheads, these are all the additional charges that you incur, and these are the costs which you spend on your promotion, business promotion, which we will not consider. These are the costs which are perks which you are giving, which are not part of the regular professional services. So those are all deleted, and only those that are pertinent to your business expenses, which includes your accountants, your office managerial staff who are not actually billing. We call them non-billable people, and all these are considered. And your billing factor is developed for a company. So, for example, for your firm, the billing factor could be 3.2. That means that if you are getting paid $100, your company will be getting paid $320 for each hour. For my company, it could be that I'm getting a 2.8, which means that I get $280 for the same amount of work. Because that
Yeah,
depends on the firm to firm.
yeah. In fact, we did a lot of work when I was in Bahrain for American Navy. We used to follow that one, uh, that standard book called RS means. That RS means will have the factors. So whatever work we are doing, the contractor sometimes may gain more, sometimes he may gain less. So they had the dollar rates. They have made it Bahrainized for the Bahrain industry with a factor. So if whatever work I do, I should pray that my work is there within that RS means book. Otherwise, it will be very difficult to make a billing. They will look for a similarity and they pay that. Yeah, Americans are a little more standardized and templates and checklist kind of contracts. But this part of the Atlantic, where that UK influenced contractors and Middle East or Far East, we don't have that kind of approach, to at least to the best of my knowledge.
Okay. Now that you talked about certain aspect here, so what if there is an item that is not in the BOQ? How do we go about handling that?
Yeah. See, the contract drawings, specification, bill of quantities together is considered as the documents which define the project. So this is how the construction contracts work. So what to be done, the drawing is supposed to mention to what quality or to what materials I need to use. The specification have to provide that information, and how much money I can get if I do that work. The bill of quantities have to give the inputs for that. Now, the general understanding in the industry, as per the quantity surveying principles of Chartered Surveyors UK, the contract should be considered complete with only the drawings and the specification. The bill of quantities is not a document to define the scope. It is only to value the scope. So what does it mean? If the item is not there in the bill of quantities, but it is required to complete the project, I need to do that, although I may not get a chance to bill it as a separate item. So that deemed to be included and the price is included somewhere in the line item somewhere. On the other hand, if the item is there in the bill of quantities, but it is not required to be installed in the contract, most of the times what the employer do, show me that in the site. If you don't show me, I'm not going to pay for that item. So this is another area of contention. We keep telling that, look, they have done a lot of things which are all not in the bill of quantities. You didn't pay them extra. By the same token, when there is an item in the bill of quantities, but they are not supplying because it is not required for the project, because the bill of quantities are prepared in a hurry by the quantity surveyor and the architects are still revising the drawings. Most of the time, this is how it happens. So maybe the bill of quantities is not captured the final IFC drawings. So there is a gap. So this argument normally happens. So the defined or the established principle is you should not delete or pay based on the bill of quantities for a scope of work.
This actually, if I may take a lighter moment and share a quick joke. A person goes to a bank every day, he keeps withdrawing money for his company. And so accidentally one day he withdraws, 10,000 rupees or something. The banker accidentally pays him about 100 rupees more. So this person doesn't say anything, just goes away. Next day, the bank teller, he thinks, okay, he's going to come back tomorrow, and we'll see what happens. So the next day, this guy is back here for once again for 10,000 rupees. This time, the banker pays him 9,900. So the banker deducts back that 100 that was due overpaid yesterday. So now this guy says, that's not fair. You're giving me 100 rupees less. So the banker tells him, well, I paid you more 100 rupees yesterday. So to which the customer replies, I can tolerate one mistake, but not two. So this is your second mistake. So you have to pay me the 100 extra. Anyways, getting back to the topic at hand, I have seen some government agencies that have taken extra items in their bill of quantities, clearly saying that we are taking these items rates to avoid any future disputes. And if such a item requirement arises at the site, we will ask you to do it and you have to perform. At which time we will pay you as per this rate. But we are not under any obligation that you cannot demand this work to be done. These are only for the purpose of determining the billing ahead of time. Have you seen that kind of stuff in other
Yes, yes,
countries?
yes. Yes, yes. It's prime cost sum, we call it. Like, for example, if the client is not decided what kind of tiles he want to use, so he may have some indicative rates. So that's all only indicative. And similarly, the prime cost sum is one part. The other one is if he is all not sure that whether the item is needed or the service is needed, that time we go for a provisional sum. So that means I keep a money so that the budget is there, my financing is taken care. So I have every right to to instruct you to do the work or not to do the work, that will not be considered as a omission of the contract. So that is there. Prime cost sum and the provisional sums are part and parcel of construction contracts. We don't have any argument on that. We have only arguments about the line items and the drawings and the specifications, and there is a discrepancy. The issues arising out of that.
See, I have a feeling from all this discussion that we seem to be talking only about bill of quantity related items. But what if it's a lump sum item? If it's a lump sum project, like
Yeah.
a EPC project or a BOT project, how do we handle these? Do they, what when the variation occurs? How do we handle that?
Yeah, there it is little tricky because the bill of quantities are going to be generated by the contractor for the purpose of making IPA. And as the design evolves, the bill of quantities may have to be modified further and further. So they normally go with the cluster. This particular service we wanted to have. So the design is not ready. So they will have to do some kind of a factoring. If I do the complete piping, let's say that I have done 40% of the work. If I have done my testing and the installations and other things, probably. So they will go for some kind of a, it may not be highly scientific, but some kind of a methodology so that his cash flows are not affected, and notwithstanding that he got some advance. So if at all a variation have to be incorporated in a EPC or in a design and build contract, it is very tricky because the employer would try to put it as if it's deemed to be included. The contractor would say no. Without that, I can complete the project and I can give the fit for purpose requirement for you. So it is tricky, and it's one of the major areas of dispute in the EPC or in the design build contracts. I'll give you one simple, again, lighter moment. In one of the EPC contracts for a major oil and company in UAE, in the construction engineers, what do you call, the engineers requirement, engineers requirement, have shown one kind of amoeba near a building. The contractor thought that it could be a swimming pool. So, and he priced for that. Then he came up with the submittals, everything was done, and it was continuously rejected. It went on for a year. Then he got fed up. What do you really want? At the time, the employer came up with a 15-page specification that is a swimming pools for Olympic Games. So he wanted to have that swimming pool in a facility in his backyard to the quality of an Olympic swimming pool with a diving deck and all the things. So he says, this is too much. You didn't even write a nomenclature that is a swimming pool. We thought that it's a gym and all nearby. It could be a swimming pool. We thought about it, but now you are asking for something for the moon. Like that was a dispute, and it went to DAB and it went on. So the employers misuse the EPC contracts to a large extent because the contractor, whatever he comes back, he says no, it's deemed to be included. That's the kind of a problem with that.
I can share one example with you where the contractors misuse this BOQ and other items also. There are times where they have taken a completely unproportional pricing of the BOQ items. The contractor decides that let's say the rock component would be about 30%, but he is going to bill it at a very high price, quoting only 10% of the as rock. And by the time the actual tender, the bottom line is noted, you find that this guy is the lowest cost. Once he starts excavating, instead of soil, there's going to be more rock. The soil he has quoted, let's say 10 rupees, just for sake of argument. The rock he's quoted 10,000 rupees.
Yeah.
And that's where he's swindling of the employer by his creative BOQ rates. And what the employer also has to be alert is that he can call the contractor and say, this item is not proportional, the rate for this. And that can be part of the negotiations also.
Yeah, we call it a BOQ loading. Per se, the BOQ loading is not considered to be wrong. But again, a prudent employer or a contract administrator, before signing the contract, it is his duty to ensure that the front loading, this kind of lopsided bills are not provided to manage the contractor's cash flow. Generally, they say that we wanted to get the money earlier, so they will try to front load the structural works, the finishing works. They try to put it lower. So that creates a lot of problem for the subcontractors also, because if there is a variation happens in the finishing works, the subcontractor will be asking for more money, but the main contractor may not recover that because of his poor rates. So that's another area where that is normally we face this problem.
I think we have discussed at length on these variations, and I know that the variations is not a small topic. We just scratch the surface, but maybe it's time to open the floor for questions. With your consent, maybe I can unmute the participants and.
We can do that, but the only thing is, my only little concern is we haven't discussed about omission and other things. Perhaps maybe we'll take the questions today, because we don't want to extend this beyond half an hour. If there is a sufficient interest, probably we can catch up at a later point of time. We will be able to discuss the further topics on that. Yeah, the floor is open. So if anyone wants to ask any questions, they can unmute, they can put a camera also up. And
thank you very much, Professor Venkata Raghavan and Dr. Reddy, for an excellent presentation and webinar. I have a couple of questions. In fact, 3 of them are already put in the Q&A box.
Okay, I'll have a look at it now. Yes, we both were busy talking.
Yeah. So, if you want, I can read those.
I'm opening up. Okay, 1 minute. Addition, omission, substitutions are all variation. Omission of a portion. Yeah, see, we didn't discuss much about omission, because that's another topic for a complete discussion. Perhaps we may have to park it for the next session. Yes, I understand. The sequence of work changes also is considered as a variation. These are all valid points. We didn't touch upon that today, but we will discuss maybe in one of the follow-up sessions. Okay. Every variation has a time impact, and time is money. Should the employer unilaterally order a variation without assessing the impact on time and cost? Yeah, that's what I told you, that the standard form of contracts provide a unilateral right to instruct a variation, but it doesn't mean that there is no obligation on the part of the contractor to compensate the contractor on the employer. So basically, if the variation is going to change the time, it is for the contractor to notify and keep the records, and within 42 days he need to provide the impacted program and whatever needed, asking for a extension of time on account of the variation. But not every variation will straight away qualify for a extension of time. That is not permitted. It has to be impacting the critical path. That's how it has been looked upon in the standard form of contracts. The third question is, variations ordered without obtaining the views from the contractor lead to disputes. A prudent contract administrator, normally they look for a proposal and the indicative impact to the program. Then they discuss with the employer whether the changes are going to bring in more value than what we are going to pay to the contractor. So those kind of exercise I've seen in some of the projects, where the projects are all well defined, well designed, and the changes are minimal, then they have the luxury. But if the projects are all not well designed and they are in a hurry, then most of the time the projects are all managed only through the variations, because the design is not done completely. So only the variations will be adding the scope to make it to a acceptable asset at the end of the day. I think I have answered your questions, Mr.
Thank
Vinod.
you very much. Thanks a lot.
There's one more person that has a question. Can you please unmute yourself?
Yeah, what time the sessions? Oh, okay.
No, that's not it. That was
old question. So anybody else have any questions? Maybe you can ask rather than typing here. That may be faster.
Good evening, sir. Thank you for the session. Yeah, my question is, as you mentioned, in unit rate contracts, change in quantity might not be considered as variation. Can you please put more light on this line? Because employer, I understand they have right to change the quantities, but wherein they won't provide an official variation note, but they'll keep revising the drawings. So does the change in drawings also constitute a variation order from the engineer or employer?
Okay. See, these are all the shortfalls of proper contract administration, if you really ask me. Because a prudent administrator, if he acknowledge that there is a change to the scope of the work, he need to issue an engineer's instruction. So the revised drawings or whatever we are talking about, that needs to be issued under an engineer's instruction. So then automatically it comes under the in the FEDIC contract at 13.1. So that's a variation. So the contractor is entitled for a extra money. So it is covered. But if the changes are instituted or through the only the change in drawings or comment in the drawings, then the contractor is at a difficult situation where he need to put a notice because it is not instructed as a variation clean. So if the 13.1 doesn't work, he has to go with the 20.1. That is, he has to claim and he has to establish that it's outside the scope of the contract and he need to be compensated for that. This is how most of the engineers, they don't go through the 13.1 route because they may be getting a kicking from the client or employer because you didn't design the drawings well. Now the contractor is asking for extra money. I'm paying more money because of your poor design. So they don't want to get into this situation. So most likely they are working because of that. That's what I could feel. Maybe
If I
Pradeep can
may,
add.
if I may take a completely different perspective and say, what is the stage of the work and the type of drawings? Let's say you have not even reached that stage, and these drawings will not impact any of the work that you've already done, or may not even affect your planning. Then what harm does it make by changing the design or the drawings? Whereas if you have already ordered, let's take the earlier example and say the tiles. Now instead of the tiles, the drawings require for whatever reason marble. Now that is not a simple change. You need to cancel your order for the tiles and bring in the marble. So similarly, it depends on your form work that you require or the machinery that you require. If those things get affected due to these drawings, yes, drawings also can be considered a variation. So all these factors have to be reviewed by your contract administrator or engineer, and accordingly, you need to submit a proper report to the employer. That's another way of looking at things.
True.
Yeah,
That's true.
it's a nice view taking the perspective of not harming the contractor at that point of time, or seeing what stage the drawing has been received by the contractor. But does the change in temporary works? Okay, there's a change in permanent structure due to which the contractor has to go with a different methodology or different temporary works methodology. So that necessarily has to be a variation, no? Because contractor would have planned in different way, and the costing you would have kept in that quantity would have been different. So that is where the problem. One more
Again,
thing is, yeah, sorry.
no, no, regarding the temporary works, again, there is no clear solution there because just because you decided to do it in a particular methodology, the employer need not accept that is the only way to do that. So if you believe that the temporary works have to be substantially changed, that is going to be part of the value item, line item, the plant and machinery or additional temporary works. You need to demonstrate that. Otherwise, generally the employer will not accept that.
Professor Venkat, you broke off.
Hello?
Yeah, lost the last 5 seconds. Can you please reiterate?
What is it? What is that?
We lost you. We lost you for about 5 seconds.
Oh, I don't know. Okay. So that's what I'm saying. The temporary works, it's not an easy area. It's very difficult to prove that because employer may not accept that that's the only way to do. And contractor cannot tell that this is what I expected to do. Now I'm doing differently. I don't think that would be a valid argument. It needs to be proven. So it is case to case. We need to consider how it is going to be.
Let me state two magic words that work here, which come with the end. So it's three words: means and method of construction. Means, MEANS, means and methods of construction. So if you ensure that in your contract, saying that the means and methods of the contract construction are part of the contractor's scope, then the employer cannot put his finger in that. However, if the employer reserves that right, saying that employer can also dictate the means and methods of construction, then the contractor is in trouble. He will not be able to ask for that. And if this clause is not missing at all, that will be where all this debate starts. Okay, I think Mr. Vinod Nair has one more question, and we'll take this as the last question, and after that we need to stop for today.
I think there are few here. I'm just seeing.
Okay.
It's called provisional items. Okay, for a project like 4-5 years duration, how to affect? See, inflation and all. See, the standard form of contracts, they provide for the change in rates due to inflation, whether the labor or it's a material. So yeah, that is not considered part of the variation because that is already covered. But if a lump sum contract says that the inflation is the contractor's risk, then you accept it to that. Then I don't think you will be able to make. Maybe you can make a claim and you can prove yourself. That's a different thing. But we are not talking about the inflation as a variation because that's not considered part of that. So any other questions?
That's a completely different topic. We can have some other day. I think this was a wonderful session.
Since you have some 5 more minutes, can I ask one more question?
Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
See, some of the contracts in India, they say, particularly in the item rate contracts, that the quantities can be varied to any extent, which leaves a very door wide open for changes. And the rates that are quoted are based on certain quantities or certain assumptions. The moment you have this kind of a clause, how do you think anyone can actually reasonably quote? If he suddenly decides to remove some major items and all that, it affects many things. So, really speaking, this opens the doors for disputes. So in India, I have found such, in particularly public sector undertakings, they write this language to any extent.
If I may answer this in a very simple manner. For example, if I give a letter to my assistant and ask him to go I'm in Hyderabad and Professor Venkat is in Bangalore. So if I give the envelope to my assistant, ask him to go in, take it to Bangalore and give it to Dr. Venkat and come back, my assistant will ask me for about 3,000 rupees. Travel charges from here to there to come back and his stay and the food and all that. If I go to a courier, that guy will charge me maybe what, 30 rupees, 50 rupees. Because that is called the economy of scale. That is a true variation. That's what a right a contractor has, which can always say that you asked me to budget for this work for which I bought such a big machine which can excavate 10,000 cubic meters per day. Now you want to use that machine for only 100 cubic meters. I'm bleeding here. So the economy of scale is something that has to be demonstrated, and then you can seek compensation on that.
Yeah.
Dr. Venkat, any other?
Yeah. We have that. We have these arguments about overhead absorption, over absorption, under absorption, and see, any employer, any part of the world, I have seen multiple jurisdictions. They all think that they can transfer all their risk to the contractor and they can live happily in their own heaven. It doesn't happen because there are contracts, there are rules, there is a fairness. The arbitrator or the adjudicator or the judge is not going to look at the contract the same way what you executed. So I think it is making it tougher. That's why one lawyer told the commencement of a construction drawing contract is to commence an arbitration. So that's how today the world is. So that's the reason, the fair and reasonable. These are all the two words I say. Whichever part of the table you are there, am I doing it fair and reasonable? Whether you are an engineer, whether you are an employer, whether you are a contractor, as long as we are able to touch your heart and say that yes, that's fair and reasonable, maybe a lot of disputes and a lot of these kind of things could go away from the industry. But we are far from that kind of a dream world today. Perhaps let's hope that more and more employers come to these kind of programs and understand and maybe they burn their fingers in 1 or 2 disputes, then probably they may try to be more fair and reasonable in their contracts. We can only wish that it happens.
I'll say only one thing. What do you want to be? I'll prove it to you. So on this note, I think we need to stop for today. There are a few more questions and more doubts. We'll take them in some other session, some other time. So
yeah.
Now I want to thank all the participants because this was the first time we have called in the participants. Thank you for your participation, and thank you, Mr. Venkat.
Yeah, we will be with the recorded session will be available in a YouTube. We will share this for all the registered participants, and if you believe that you wanted to have a further discussion or any other topics of your interest, you can always put that in the feedback form, which we will circulate after the session. Thank you very much. I think our experiment, I think we have around 25 people. That's a good start for us to do this.
Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Reddy, and thank you, Professor Venkata Raghavan. Thank you very much.
Thank you, both of you. We'll be looking forward to more sessions like this. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much. So, Mr. Reddy, we can stop the recording, right?
Yes.
Thank you, sir. Have a nice day.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir.